Many South Africans will agree that there's no upside to the rising repo rate. Consumers have been feeling the pinch on most fronts, with ever-increasing rising costs like fuel, electricity and, of course, groceries. But there is an upside, apparently. If you've got savings, now is the time to invest and take advantage of those interest rates. Joining me to talk about this now is Head of Retail Investment at Nedbank, Sisandile Cikido. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I mean, it's a bizarre thing to say that there's an upside to interest rates, but of course we're talking about savings and investment here. And before you give me your first answer, I just want to disclaim that we did not agree on the colour. That's right. But yes, in general, let's start with what these interest rate hikes that we've seen mean for the South African consumer.
Good morning, Rofhiwa, and thank you for having me in studio. Good morning to your viewers. So essentially, as we know, when we hear an interest rate hike, we get quite nervous, right? Because as most consumers with debt, it means you're going to be paying more on your debt and your higher purchase agreements than what you were paying, say, a year or two ago. A couple of friends and I have actually been doing some of the maths, and some of us are paying between 2,000 and 10,000 rand on our bonds, more than what we were paying a year or two ago. So that generally just means we're more tense. But there is an upside, believe it or not. It isn't all doom and gloom, because if you do have savings, it means that impact will also be passed through to your savings, and you'll possibly earn more on your interest as well.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. A lot of us don't have savings at the moment, unfortunately. I think with the peak of the pandemic, many of us had to dip into short-term and long-term savings. So if I want to take advantage of the interest rates, but I don't necessarily have those savings at the moment, how do I go about doing that?
I always call it a concept of the psychology of savings, and not necessarily about the money of savings. If you remember back in the day, in most of our townships, we were sent with envelopes, whether it was 5 rand or 10 rand, to contribute to a burial society or some kind of stokvel. And when people say, I don't have enough money to save, I say, what are you doing that you possibly could be cutting back on? And we saw in the pandemic, as you've mentioned, as much as a lot of people lost their livelihoods, a lot of people lost loved ones, and a lot had to take on a little bit more. But a lot of people actually changed their mindset, some like myself. And when I couldn't go out, I was like, okay, where can I allocate the funds that I was actually allocating to going out in terms of my savings? And that's when I really started looking at things differently. It's not too late, though. I always say to people, you can start where you are with what you have. And I say something as simple as starting with 500 rand in a tax-free savings account, and then being able to add as little as 50 rand a month, or as and when you have, to start your long-term savings journey. And the great thing about something like that is that whatever interest that you earn, you will never pay tax on those on those earnings.
Yeah, and you mentioned tax-free savings account, but what other investment portfolios should consumers be considering as they take advantage of the repo rate?
Firstly, I'd say please speak to a financial advisor and seek some kind of financial guidance and assistance, because it is a long-term journey and you do need to take quite a broad lens. But I always say, as a rule of thumb, please diversify your investments. You never want to find yourself in a position where you've taken what you have and you've put it in, say, a fixed term investment, which is absolutely great at this time, right? If you're in a rising interest rate cycle, you want to kind of fix in some of your funds so that you benefit from that even when the downward interest rates come, well, rather when the downward cycle comes, right? But you also need to have money that you have easy access to, because as we saw during COVID-19 and the pandemics and lockdowns, that proverbial rainy day did come. So you need to be able to access some funds. So diversify, and start with as little as whatever it is that you have. So look at your fixed investments for medium to long term, and for immediate stuff, put some money away where you can access it, but do make it a little bit difficult for yourself. So putting your money in your current account and leaving it there and saying, I might have it later, and also it's not earning you any interest. Make sure that your money is working while you're sleeping.
Yeah. Sure, but of course with every good thing there must be some cons as well. So we've talked about the pros of these portfolios, but what could be some of the cons?
So like I mentioned, in a fixed term investment, for instance, now you want to take advantage of that. So you take your money and you put it away for a number of months. Say you decide on 12 months or 60 months for that matter. The con there is, yes, you'll be benefiting from the upward rate cycle right now because it doesn't matter what the rates do in a year or two, you won't be impacted if you're in a 60-month term, right? But what that means is you cannot access those funds for the duration of the term, at least not without a penalty. And all banks are mandated and need to charge, or rather obligated to charge a penalty fee where you are releasing funds sooner than the agreed term. Right? So that's one con. And then in terms of being able to access your funds and say a notice deposit account, for instance, the benefit there is when the rate cycle goes up, your interest also goes up. But when the rate cycle comes down, the exact same impact is there. So it also comes down. But the benefit there is that you can access those funds as and when you need them, depending on whatever term that you have, whether it's 32 days, 7 days, 24 hours notice, or even immediate.
Yeah. And just a final thought from you. We've spoken about the different investment portfolios that you've just mentioned there for savings. But are there opportunities outside of that? And I'm thinking here about the stock market, for example. When you are engaging a financial advisor, are those some of the options that they could present as a form of maybe short to medium term investment?
Absolutely. I would actually look at that a little bit as a long-term investment, though, because as we've seen with market cycles, you really do have to give it time.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you were heavily invested 3 years ago and you saw a bit of a downward cycle when COVID-19 hit and you took out all your money out of panic, you would have lost money, right? But if you kind of let the markets recover, you'd be in a better position right now than what you would have been 3 years ago. So I'd say take a long-term view, but absolutely, you're correct. Have a diversified portfolio, and that means whether it's bonds, ETFs, stocks, unit trusts that are in there, long-term sort of fixed investment, cash investments, properties, like I said, it is important for you to have a diversified view of what it is you're investing in so that you don't put all your eggs in one basket, because we know what happens in those cases.
Yeah, we've seen it.
Exactly.
Expressed. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. That is Head of Retail Investments, Sisandile Cikido, joining us this morning from Nedbank, speaking about the advantage that you can take from the higher interest rates in terms of savings and investment.